Hey guys, I'm Phoenix Gray, and this is LitRPG Happy Hour, where I sample LitRPG and alcoholic beverages. Feel free to drink along if you dare. Today I will be reading a sample of Infinite Reality Daggerland Online Novel 1 by Peter Meredith, and I'll be playing a game along with it called A Change of Scenery, where I will take a drink every time there is a chapter or scene break. If you want to follow along, pause this video and download a copy of the book at the link provided, or you can just drink whenever I do. As a disclaimer, I do not read every book that I drink to. This is all for fun and to share the word about, spread the word about LitRPG and these awesome books. Having said that, let's get started. Today I'm going to be drinking another one of these On the Rocks premium cocktails. This one is the Cosmopolitan. The description is smooth cranberry, bright lemon with a touch of orange on the finish. It's not like red, which I would assume it should be since it's smooth cranberry, but I haven't had like one of these at a bar in forever, so I'm assuming this is how it's supposed to look. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and pour it into a glass if I can get it open. I don't know if you've noticed, but there is like one less thing behind me, so I'm very slowly getting the moving underway. Well, the unpacking already moved. Anyway, let me get started. This starts with chapter 1, so I'm going to go ahead and take a drink. These are actually kind of strong. They are, where is it? 40 proof, 20% alcohol by volume, so I can already kind of not feel it, but I can taste it. Anyway, chapter 1. Greg Nelson stifled yet another yawn as he listened with half an ear to his chief financial officer go on, and Greg barely looked at the screen with its flow charts and pie charts and every manner of visual representation of statistical data forecasting the market trends of the blah blah concurrent with their blah and their blah blah blah. He was having trouble staying awake, and yet he couldn't simply disregard the capital side of his business. GN Industries, when it finally got off the ground, wasn't just going to create the perfect game world, it was also supposed to make gobs of money. Not that he really needed the money. As one of the big 6 developers, Greg was already rich. He fit somewhere between, look at my yacht that I just paid for in cash, and I'm building my own island the size of Connecticut. He was comfortably rich, but in order to compete against his old company, Infinite Reality Gaming, he needed somewhere close to $1 billion. The very idea that his CFO was discussing ways to acquire said $1 billion should have been enough to focus Greg and keep him awake. However, he had barely gotten 4 hours of sleep a night for the last month and hadn't seen the inside of a gym for, well, to be honest, he had never seen the inside of a gym. In an effort to stay awake, he brought a pale hand up and began to gently smack his own round, soft cheek. He was in mid-smack when his smartwatch vibrated with a message. Greg hated the vibrating mode because it felt like a wasp was landing on him and, as always, he fairly jumped in fright. Sorry about that, go on, Greg said to his CFO, who had stopped at his odd twitch. The CFO smiled blandly and slipped straight back into yawn speak as Greg was beginning to categorize it. Surreptitiously, Greg took a peek at his watch. There is a break-in occurring at Mindanome right now. Shoot, Greg whispered. The timing couldn't have been worse. He brought the watch to his face and replied to the message. Give me 20 minutes. 20 minutes? The CFO asked. Greg hit the send button on his watch. Sorry, a slight emergency. Will this take much longer? The CFO grimaced as he glanced at the 40 slides he still had to go through. I suppose I can speed things along. I'm all ears, Greg said. Please continue. The endlessly bland words began to flow once more from the finance officer. They washed like a breeze over Greg and were quickly forgotten. Another attempt at Mindanome. This made the 3rd in only a week, and the 5th in the last month. It was strange, but not very worrisome. Most likely it was just another gang of thieves, and, if so, they were going to find out that Greg Nelson was far more cutthroat than he appeared. Of course, 5 break-ins in a month could mean it was a collaborated, financed operation. If so, someone is spending a boatload of money on this, Greg muttered under his breath. A lot of lives and a lot of money for nothing. He couldn't understand what they thought they were going to get. Yes, there were expensive paintings at Mindanome, and gold-threaded carpets, and gems and jewels in abundance, but there were also guards and guard dogs and all manner of traps. The risk-to-reward ratio was far out of proportion. It didn't make sense to Greg Nelson. He was a very concrete thinker. Every action of his was reasoned and thought out, while these break-ins were a complete waste of someone's resources. The remainder of the meeting seemed to go by quickly as Greg dwelled on what he would find when he got to Mindanome. More than likely, nothing but blood and hacked-apart bodies. Greg fairly jumped out of his chair when his CFO finally asked, Are there any questions? No, thank you. I'll make sure to review my notes and get back to you if I can think of anything, he said, ushering the man out through the crystal doors of his office. His receptionist, a drop-dead gorgeous blonde who could barely answer the phones, but who never wore a bra, announced, "Mr. Tim Cole is here to see you." Her smile was more than a little crooked as she glanced Cole's way. He was a bruiser in a bad suit. As always, his jacket was rumpled, his hair was greasy, and he leered openly at the receptionist. "Okay, Cole, that's enough," Greg said, trying to sound stern. "You can take off, Brandy. It's getting late." She made it obvious that she didn't like being around Cole and was gone so quickly that she caught up with the CFO before he could make it to the elevators. "Why don't you ever cinch your tie properly?" Greg groused, looking up at Cole, who towered over him. "Because life is more fun with a loose tie," Cole said, looking down his bent nose at Greg and speaking as if he were either imparting wisdom to a 12-year-old or reading from a fortune cookie. The two stood watching through the glass outer door as Brandy swayed over to the elevator. She seemed to be flirting with the CFO as they waited. When the elevator door closed on them, Cole turned to Greg. "So, are you going to Mendenome or what? They've been inside for over an hour now. I don't think the guard dogs are cutting it this time." "I'm not too worried," Greg said, and he wasn't. Not in the least. "Make sure the building is locked down and then join me on the other side." Cole gave him a nod and left. Greg went back into his office and locked the door behind him. Going to one of the oak wall panels, he pressed his top right corner and stood back as a portion of the panel slid to the side, revealing a retinal scanner. He stared into the light and said as clearly as he could, "Greg Nelson." This activated a secret door that led to a small room that held nothing besides a soft bed and a wireless neural coupler. Like the other 74 million couplers created by his old company, his was a half circle of clear plastic, enclosing enough computing power to run a small city. Taking off his suit, coat, and tie, Greg lay on the bed and placed the coupler across his forehead, just above his eyes. He took a deep breath and thought, "Infinite reality." This activated the neural coupler, and with only the words, "Begin program," Greg's reality fell away. He was no longer in the secret room. He was no longer Greg Nelson. For the moment, he was only a singular consciousness among millions, and before him were limitless possibilities. He entered a new world where, if he wished, he could be a farmer on Mars, or a milkmaid in 15th century France, or a computer programmer in 21st century America. These options were open to anyone, but of course no one ever chose them. There were 60 official games within the infinite reality world. They ran the gamut from World War II strategy to first-person zombie survival to virtual sports, which allowed the sickliest person the ability to play linebacker in the NFL. However, the most popular game by far was Daggerland. Daggerland, the swords and sorcery brainchild of Atticus Arching, another of the Big Six, was perfect in every way. It overflowed with rich detail, from the smell of a warrior's sweat to the feel of a butterfly's wing, to the way a warhammer sounded when it crushed in an orc's skull. The world of Daggerland was as utterly seamless as it was huge. Within the game, there were over 200 million square miles of mountains, rivers, forests, and oceans. There were cities and towns of every size. Some floated among the clouds, where the views were breathtaking, and others were subterranean, buried deep beneath the earth, where the dark things preyed upon each other, and upon anyone foolish enough to delve too deep. Unlike the real world, it was an endlessly exciting land where every imaginable beast, and many beasts that denied imagination, roamed freely. It was the home of mythological heroes, a place where gods ruled in majestic halls and demons fought for souls deep in bloody carnal pits beneath the earth. Daggerland was a mix of endless evil and miraculous good. There was magic and heroism and skulking thieves, and there were adventures, tens of thousands of them, and there were quests, some of which were amazing sagas that could take years to finish, and some that were epic in scale, involving armies of millions. Most of the adventures were programmed into the game, but there were many that sprang up among the players out of pure hapstance, or out of desperate need. Before Daggerland there had been other virtual reality games, but none could compare, and they had all withered and died. In fact, Daggerland was such a wild success that the Supreme Court had declared it a monopoly, and now 3 of the Big Six developers, including Greg Nelson, had broken away and were designing their own virtual worlds. In the meantime, Greg couldn't get enough of the lands he had helped to create. With his coupler firmly fixed, his consciousness floated in an eternal darkness lit only by a glowing grid. Within the grid were names of the 60 official games, and at the top was Daggerland. He told the program. Immediately the grid vanished, and 2 doors took its place. Over one was the word Gethahim, and over the other was New Character. Greg went to the door marked Gethahim, opened it, and walked through. At that moment he ceased being Greg Nelson, game developer and all-around nerd. He was no longer soft and weak and pale. When he went through the door, he stepped out as a real man, tall and slim, and yet very strong. He had long, wavy black hair and eyes the color of emerald. He became Gethahem, master of the Red Wizards, and he was no longer bound by the normal laws of physics. Yes, gravity held his feet to the floor and water froze at 32 degrees, and if you were to strike a match, it would create a flame. All of this was built in the game, but so too was incredible magic. Show me the intruders, Gethahem commanded. He was on the very top floor of Mindanome, a citadel he had created out of stone, steel, and sorcery. This was his lair, workshop, office, /workshop/office, and as organized and tidy as he was in the real world, he was something of a slob in Daggerland. Books, papers, and scrolls littered every surface. Magic swords had been tossed in a heap by the fireplace, and of the several arcane amber potion bottles in a silver box on the hearth, at least one had broken open, so that the room smelled of sulphur and lilac. His office was circular and windowless, lit by torches that burned endlessly. In the center of the room was a desk that had been carved from a single huge hunk of redwood and polished until it gleamed. Behind it was a comfortable leather chair that looked as though it belonged back in Gian Industries, and, set just to the side of the desk, was a full-length mirror on an elaborate stand. It was to the mirror he had spoken. Well, before it had only reflected the mess of his office, now displayed the adventurers, a group of 8 people, 6 men, 2 women. 4 of the men were encased, head to toe, in heavy plate armor that was dented, scratched, and bloody. They carried shields and swords, and these too were bloody. These were the tanks, the warriors who shouldered the burden of much of the fighting and who took the brunt of the damage. 2 of the others, a man and 1 of the women, wore what was called half-plate. It consisted of plates of fitted metal, in this case steel, over supple leather. This made the armor much lighter and was usually worn by clerics and rangers, or by adventurers who couldn't afford the more expensive full plate. These 2 were clerics, healers who could fight and cast spells. The last 2 were shrouded in long gray robes. One carried a staff of oak and the other a straight wand. They could only be spellcasters. No rogues? That's strange. Show me the exterior grounds. The surface image of the mirror faded into a blur of colors that gradually reformed to show the area between the outer wall and his castle. It was strewn with butchered and burned bodies. He'd had over 100 men-at-arms and 50 war dogs guarding his walls, and now there wasn't one left alive. From the scorched stonework, it was clear that the 2 spellcasters had killed most of them. Incineration spells, very much standard, Gethahem commented, and some chain lightning, but no meteor swarms. Mirror, show me the audience chamber. The image switched to a huge room with heavy stone columns stretching to a dome of burnished bronze. He had modeled the room after St. Paul's Cathedral in London. Instead of an altar, it had a wide dais and a bejeweled throne. There had been a fight here as well. Flanking the dais had been 2 tremendous figures. Although they appeared to be only statues, they had been iron golems with orders to remain inanimate until certain circumstances occurred, trespassing being one of them. As they were made of iron, magically imbued with great strength and immune to most spell work, they were very difficult to destroy. But there they were, broken and lifeless. So, I finally have a small challenge, Gethahem said. Show me the intruders again. Good. Detect magic. He had worked certain spells into the mirror, and now he saw different aspects of the 6 adventurers glow in a golden light. The staff and wand, which was expected, all 4 of the swords carried by the tanks, a few rings, a couple of shields, and a cloak. Bog standards, as our English friends say, he muttered, and then strode for the secret stair that led down. As he went to meet the group, he thought, spells. The white marble stairs faded into the background of his vision as in front of him, glowing in neon green, there appeared a list of his spells, ordered by tiers from 1 to 9. He began casting defensive spells on himself, and, by the time he opened the door to the 6th floor, the air around him fairly crackled. The intruders were in one of his experimental laboratories, poking through a large case in which a juvenile shambler had been housed. Gethahem had been trying to domesticate the creature, but it had proven to be difficult and now was nothing more than a mass of rotting vegetation. It was a shambler, in case you didn't know, he said from the doorway. The adventurers leapt back, making him smile. I'm going to give you one chance. If you tell me who sent you, I'll let you turn around right now and walk out of here alive. The group glanced back and forth before one of the tanks said in a voice as deep as a troll's, Maybe if you threw more of an incentive our way, we might think about it. When he said incentive, he meant gold. The only question was if he wanted actual gold or virtual gold. $10,000 per person might do it. Dollars it was, then. 10,000 was nothing to Greg Nelson, and yet it was an incredible sum to ask for. Gethahem looked at the man closely. The tank was mostly covered in steel, and only blue eyes shone out from his helmet. Despite that, he saw the man was perfectly serious. $10,000, Gethahem asked. Is that what you're getting paid to undertake this suicide mission? The tank didn't answer. He only smiled, his eyes crinkling behind the face bars of his helmet. I'll give you 1,000, Gethem said, and your lives. Again the man said nothing, which was answer enough. Someone was bankrolling these goons, but why? It couldn't be to test Gethem's security arrangements since he could change them at any time, and it definitely wasn't an assassination attempt. Even 6-1, they didn't stand a chance. What was happening didn't make sense, and for the first time in this world, a worm of fear began to squiggle in Gethem's belly. For the first time, he felt like Greg Nelson, and he didn't like it. He had chosen this game and this world to get away from Greg Nelson. The fear made him angry. New offer, he said. I'll give you $1, and I'll let one of you live. Just tell me who sent you. The tank grunted a laugh, but otherwise neither answered nor moved. It almost seemed like they were waiting for him to attack first. It was a big mistake. At least 41. At level 41, he was the most powerful wizard in Daggerland. She yervamuk me, Gethem hissed. In a blink there was a thunderous noise, followed by a sudden explosion of flame, and in the midst of the flame stood a towering creature. It seemed to be either on fire or made of fire. It roared at the group, breathing out a huge cloud of superheated ash, blinding and burning them. It then rushed at the group, slashing with its huge burning claws. One of the wizards dodged to the side and sent golden bolts ripping at Gethem, who didn't even blink as the bolts struck his magical protections and puffed out of existence. In response, he said only a simple word that was so full of magical energy that the wizard's eyes rolled up into his head and he collapsed, stunned as if he'd had a safe fall on him. More attack spells came his way, and they too fizzled against his barriers. Gethem reversed gravity for one of the fighters just by lifting a hand. The man fell 20 feet straight to the air to crash against the ceiling where he was pinned. As the man struggled against the new direction of his gravity, Gethem swept the room with magical flame, laughing as he did. He lived for this, he loved it, and he was just getting started. Alright, there's a scene break. I'm really enjoying this so far. It's an interesting concept with a rich game developer. I haven't seen this one yet. Everything is very well written, everything is very well described. It jumps into the action very quickly, so far I am really enjoying this. Alright. As Gethem prepared to summon a second fiend, this one from an outer ring of hell, the body of Greg Nelson suddenly opened his eyes. With a jerk he sat up, and with a great deal of wobbling he stood. Walking was much more difficult than standing. Stumbling like a toddler, he made it to the door, but fell twice on the way to his desk. Thankfully, he managed to get into the leather-bound chair without marking up his face. He needed that face intact for the computer to recognize it. To the man inside Greg Nelson, the face felt like a rubber mask sitting over his own. Opening a laptop, he sat as still as possible as red light zeroed in on his eyes, scanning his retinas. Next, the facial recognition software gave him a once-over and passed him through to the voice analysis. Greg Nelson, he mumbled. Error, the machine said. Please restate your name. He cleared Greg's throat and tried again. Greg Nelson. He heard the mistake, and yet the software gave him access. Slurred or not, the voice was Greg's. Security, he said. Everyone who knew Greg knew that he had always been one for both micromanagement and centralized control. The laptop was proof of that. He could monitor and adjust the security for the entire building from that one computer. Fire control systems, he said. Please restate your command. He worked his jaw around and tried again. Fire control systems. This time his lips barely tripped over the words. In a blink the computer brought up the layout for the building's high-tech fire suppression system. Turn off fire control on all floors. The computer gave him a, "Are you sure you want to do something so stupid?" prompt. When he repeated the order, the fire suppression system flashed. Disabled. Next he commanded, "Access all files on the mainframe." He now sounded very close to Greg Nelson. The computer responded by bringing up over 96,000 files. Delete all files. Yes, I understand. Delete all files. Just like that, 3 years of work disappeared. But he wasn't done yet. Working his legs with a little more dexterity, he made his way to the third-floor custodial room, where a middle-aged woman stood by a cleaning cart, looking at him in confusion. Mr. Nelson? He tried to smile, but it didn't feel right, and he didn't have a mirror in which to practice. "I want you to take the night off," he said, hoping it sounded like something Greg would say. He reached into his pocket and fumbled out a wad of 20s. "Take this and go have fun. The dirt will still be here tomorrow." Bewildered, she thanked him and left without looking back. Her hand clutched around the money, which was probably close to a month's pay. Once she was gone, he went through the storeroom and hauled out everything that read, "Caution flammable." It didn't take long before the cleaning cart was filled and tilting madly. He struggled the cart into the R&D teamwork area and began to splash gallon after gallon about. Unfortunately, he couldn't destroy every last vestige of what he considered stolen proprietary information, but he sure as hell was going to try. Of course, most of that information was still locked up in Greg Nelson's brain, but it wouldn't be for long. When the carpets, the walls, and the computers were well saturated, he calmly rolled a chair to the center of the room, lit his fire, and then sat down in the middle of it. He had a front row seat to the destruction of GN Industries. A smile cracked his face as his skin began to peel and his hair began to smolder. In Daggerland, Gethahim had just slaughtered the last of the tanks, cracking open his armor with a lightning bolt and half-cooking the man inside. He then turned to the one wizard left alive. She was out of spells and nearly out of hit points. Blood puddled around her feet. She should have conceded and clocked out, but she seemed to be waiting for something, perhaps for him to make her another offer. I'm just looking for a name, Getham said. You can say you tried to fight me. You can say that it felt too real and that you panicked. The money will be just between you and me. How much? She asked, around a sharp intake of breath. They were both playing extreme mode, and the pain from her wounds had to be intense. Money really wasn't a problem. Getham literally had tons of gold, and Greg Nelson had boatloads of cash. 2,000. What do you say? 50,000. He could afford that much, but it was outrageous. He laughed and countered. 5,000. 45,000, she answered, seeming to gain strength, as if their haggling fueled something inside of her. Though I might go as low as... She paused, drawing out the moment for so long that, in a cold fury, he touched her, sending electricity coursing through her flesh. It wasn't enough to kill her, just enough to hurt like a bitch. You aren't clocking out, so you must want money, Getham said. Give me your final price, or I'll keep frying you until you do, and you know what that means. All of this will have been for nothing. How do you know I want money? She asked. You're the one who keeps offering it. I could be just buying time. This made him laugh. Buying time for what? Are you waiting for the cavalry to show up and rescue you in the nick of time? Or do you actually believe... In the middle of his sentence, Getham's eyes suddenly rolled up in his head and he collapsed. He was very much dead, because without Greg Nelson, who was burning away in the real world, there would be no Getham, master of the Red Wizards. I was buying time for that, the wizard said with a grin. Slowly, painfully she stood, her eyes seeming to gaze off into nothing. She wasn't staring at all the loot that would be hers. She was staring at the words in green neon that sat in the air in front of her face. Congratulations, Kira. You are now a level 14 wizard. Seeing that was even better than the treasure that was hers alone. Of course, it wasn't nearly as good as the cash she was going to pocket in the real world. The wizard had $50,000 waiting for her when she clocked out. It was scary money for something so simple. Whoever Getham was in the real world, he had enemies with lots of cash to throw around. Too bad for him, she murmured. Ah, yes, this is getting better by the second. I'm very much enjoying this read. Chapter 2. New Rochelle, New York. The building had been torched on purpose. Supervisory Special Agent Daniel Rohn could see that even before he rolled down his window and flashed his badge to get through the perimeter of the crime scene. It took an effort to burn down a building of glass and steel, especially when tech companies were involved. Generally speaking, they didn't have much flammable material on the premises and, what was more, they almost always had state-of-the-art fire suppression systems. 99% of the time, they used dry chemicals to protect their acres of server farms. Which begged the question, what's with all the fire trucks? Rohn asked. There had to be 20 fire trucks of all shapes and sizes parked around the still-smoking building. Probably to make sure the job was complete, Agent Amanda Waterfall answered from the passenger seat. Nothing kills electronics faster than a jet of water fired from a high-pressure cannon. She leaned over and hunched close to Rohn's lap to peer up at the building through his window. He was acutely aware of her long, blonde hair spilling onto his thigh. She was pale but pretty, with soft features partially hidden behind black-rimmed glasses. From the back seat, Jared Maddox's caffeine-wired nerves sent his left knee bouncing up and down. What I want to know is why we're here. Sure, it's a tech company, but unless I need a new prescription for my glasses, that right there is arson. Or maybe not. Maybe it was an actual accident. I would never know, and do you know why? Because you're not an arson investigator? Rohn asked the obligatory question, rolling his ice blue eyes. That's right, I am not an arson investigator. I am a computer forensic examiner, and us right here, we are not one of the cat teams. We belong in the lab where there's air conditioning and where a building won't fall on us if the wind blows. And you know what? I read that arsonists like to come back and watch their handiwork. He's probably one of those people back there. Or maybe it's one of the firemen. Amanda made a face, her pert nose wrinkling. A fireman? Please, you're being ridiculous. The fourth person in the car, Marshall Much, who was also a forensic examiner, said, "I agree with Jared. I read there is actually a disturbing and growing trend among firemen to light fires, like in Fahrenheit 451. Jared started snapping his spindly fingers rapidly. To Rowan they looked like dancing white spiders. Where Amanda was pale, Jared was sickly in his lack of color. "That's right," Jared said. "Or like Backdraft. It was a fireman who was setting all the fires, only you didn't find that out until the end, except I knew it long, long before." "Of course you knew it, because Hollywood sucks," Marshall said, pulling Jared back. In his excitement, Jared had practically crawled into the front seat. He was so skinny that he could fit between the chairs with ease. Marshall was Jared's physical opposite. He was overweight, but not grossly so, and looked bigger than he was because of the way he was always so relaxed. The way he lounged at every opportunity made it look as though he took more space than he really did. "Forget the firemen," Amanda said. "Jared was right about the CAT teams. Why aren't they here?" The FBI's CAT Cyber Action Team provided rapid response when a major computer intrusion occurred, or when there was a cyber-related emergency, which happened far more frequently than people realized. There were approximately 50 agents, all told, within the Cyber Action Team, and they were spread out in field offices around the country. It was an overworked group. "They're busy and we were on deck, so live with it," Roan said, getting out of the car and raking a hand through his short dark hair. Behind him, Jared muttered, "On deck? I thought he'd been in the Army, not in the Navy." Amanda groaned. "It's a baseball term, idiot. Now get your gear and try not to embarrass us." They each carried a stainless steel case about the size of an airplane carry-on, all save Roan. He was new, both to the New York field office and to the cyber division. He only had a basic knowledge of computers. His real expertise lay in his knowledge of people. He could spot a scumbag from 50 yards and sniff out a lie like a bloodhound could sniff out a rotting corpse. What he was doing in the cyber division was not just anyone's guess, it was everyone's guess. Rumors flew all around him, mostly behind his back, though some asked him point blank. When that happened, he almost always just shrugged his brawny shoulders and changed the subject. But this was the FBI, where the people were not just trained to snoop, they were paid to do so. They found out that trouble seemed to follow Roan wherever he went. In his 12 years with the Bureau, he'd had more firearm incidents than any one agent, and not just during the previous 12 years, but in any period in the Bureau's history. His jacket read that he was violently effective. Still, violence from its agents was not the image the FBI wished to present, and so Roan had been promoted and shuttled to the cyber division, where most of the detective work was done outside the public eye, and the opportunity for violence of any sort was almost zero. Being in the computer lab kept Roan out of trouble, but it also bored him to death. He had spent the last 2 months staring at a computer screen, and he was starting to lose his tan. Soon he'd be as pasty white as Jared, and the thought bothered him. "I'm looking for Special Agent in Charge Mike Carran," he said to the first uniform he came to. Roan was pointed to a Ford Taurus, where an aging FBI agent with thin blonde hair sat with his long legs jutting out of the driver's side door, a laptop open across his thighs. Karen glanced up and snorted. "Roan! Look at you! I never thought I'd see you with a nerd patrol." On one hand, it was an odd thing to say, since half the FBI was made up of scientists and analysts who never saw the light of day while they were on the clock. On the other hand, the cyber division seemed to be the place where the geek factor was off the charts. There was no getting around it or pretending otherwise. Roan only grunted, though. What the grunt could mean was anyone's guess. Karen glanced at Roan's team, his eyes hanging on Amanda a second too long. "He's the only agent they've booted from the violent crime division for being too violent," he said, as if speaking only to her. "Hi, my name is Tim Karen." He had his hand out to her. She took it, saying, "I'm Agent Waterfall, and these are forensic examiners Jared Maddox and Marshall Much. Why are we here, Agent Karen?" "Because we need your particular expertise, of course, Agent Waterfall." Roan didn't like Karen's smile or the lies he was spinning. "You need our help to solve an arson case?" Roan asked. "Alright, let me narrow it down for you. It's either the owner hoping to collect on the insurance money, a disgruntled employee, or someone looking to cover up a crime." Karen tut-tutted him. "Don't be too hasty, Roan." He turned to Amanda and said, "He's always too quick to jump to conclusions. I told him that when he was just a pup right out of Quantico. You should have seen him back then. You never saw a more eager beaver." Roan ignored his old mentor's badgering and concentrated on the case. He knew there were only 2 other possibilities when it came to arsonists, but both were highly unlikely. "A serial?" He gave the building a second look. "No way a serial arsonist did this. I can see from here that the fire started on the inside and barely made its way out. No, serials like the big show, and this one was dull." "And that leaves?" Karen asked. "A corporate hit," Roan answered, his face screwed up, as if he knew the answer was obviously wrong. "That's extremely rare in the white-collared world. even more rare than a serial arsonist. There's too much downside. From what I can tell about these suit-wearing criminals, they'll gamble with money, but not with hard prison time. Amanda spoke up. Anyone desperate enough to resort to arson is going to leave a trail. If you wish, we can start checking into GN's competition. We can also look into their employees to see if anyone unexpectedly came into a little extra cash. Maybe check their bank records and phone logs. Of course, we could have done that back at the office. There's something else, isn't there? Oh, she's a smart one, Rowan. Keep her close. Karen turned his laptop around and showed it to Rowan's team. This is security footage taken yesterday evening just after 6. They watched Greg Nelson in his R&D lab splashing around gallons of carpet cleaner. That's the owner and CEO of GN Industries, Karen explained. So it was an inside job. Rowan squinted at the screen. Is he drunk? The way he's acting, he looks like he's... What the hell? Greg had just started the fire, and instead of running away, he calmly sat down. Within a minute, fire and smoke had engulfed him. Marshall was a light shade of green as he said, Suicide is not under the FBI's peer review unless you're suggesting that he was coerced or controlled in some way. Jared looked excited by the idea. Is this an Area 51 deal? Or, an X Factor situation? Or is this some sort of like in that movie where the girl... Rowan glared him into silence. As messed up as that video is, it still looks like suicide. Do you want our AV guys to check the footage to see if it was tampered with? Before Karen could answer, Jared said, I know what it is. Did you see that thing on his head? That was a neurocoupler. I'd bet any of you $1 that he was in Daggerland. Marshall and Jared shared a look that mingled horror and excitement. This is actually a possibility we're checking into, Karen said. We contacted someone over Infinite Reality to get this guy's login information, but it turns out, because of privacy laws, that sort of information is not stored. They don't keep any of it. When a person logs on, and what he does and where he goes in the virtual world can't be tracked. Total immersion virtual reality had been around for 11 years, and Rowan had never tried it. He liked his mind securely locked away in his own brain. Virtual reality was supposed to be perfectly safe, and yet there was Greg Nelson burning himself alive. Marshall and Jared were whispering in excitement about another case involving Daggerland when a long black limousine pulled through the police tape. You want to know why you're here? Karen said. This is it. Karen walked to the limo and opened one of the doors, gesturing for Rowan's team to climb in. In the very back of the limo was an older man, gray-haired and round in both the face and the belly. He sat with his hands resting on the head of a cane that stood propped between his wide-splayed legs. You're Grayson Fulbright, Jared said, his voice filled with awe. You're like the 7th richest guy in the world. 5th, actually, Fulbright corrected. He then looked long at Special Agent Karen. Now do you believe me? Now do you believe that Arching is behind this? Suicide by fire? It's extremely apropos, considering. Karen drummed his fingers for a few seconds on the gleaming wood of the vehicle's wet bar. I'm not even going to ask how you know about Nelson's death, but yes, it's starting to look like a possibility. I don't know how, though. Every expert in the field keeps telling me it's impossible. Fulbright thumped his cane. That's because it should be impossible, damn it. Seeing Rowan's team glancing back and forth at the two of them in confusion, Fulbright explained. This isn't an isolated event. There were 6 developers who designed the infinite reality worlds, Daggerland and all the rest. Those 6, only 2 are still alive. Christine Carson and Atticus Arching, who some people call the father of virtual reality. He paused to let that sink in before going on. 3 months ago, Lane Gorman walked out of his house one night without saying a word to his wife or kids. He walked away and no one has seen him or heard from him since. Karen nodded. We've been monitoring his accounts, his phone, everything, but he's in the wind. He's not in the wind, he's dead, Fulbright announced. Probably 6 feet under, just like Crease and D'Angelo. They were homos, not that I care. But 2 months ago, they were in Crease's home, online. You don't know that, Karen said. Fulbright made a humph sort of noise and thudded his cane a second time. They were found in his reality room, so it follows. Either way, Crease stabbed D'Angelo to death and then slit his own throat. The old man sounded to Rowan as though he were telling tales around a campfire, trying to scare little kids. And now this. Greg Nelson burns down his own building with himself in it. There's only one explanation if you ask me. Agent Waterfall surprised Rowan by saying, As much as we appreciate your input, Mr. Fulbright, the investigation is only 12 hours old. We don't like to jump to conclusions so quickly. Fulbright smiled, showing overly perfect teeth. They were the kind of teeth that only lots of money could buy. I like you. You have guts. You'll do well on the other side. The other side of what? She asked. Fulbright smiled dim. This isn't the team you're sending, it's Daggerfall. We haven't decided anything. As Agent Waterfall pointed out, this aspect of the investigation is just beginning. We haven't even interviewed Mr. Arching yet. I can tell you right now that you won't be able to, Fulbright said. If anyone is in the wind, it's Arching. In fact, he is the wind. He reached out with his cane and tapped the limo's door. It was their cue to leave. Call me when your investigation hits its inevitable dead end. So this is taking an interesting turn, because I thought that the Greg Nelson guy was going to be the main character, but he obviously killed himself. So this is LitRPG and a mystery. Alright, continuing on. How did he know about Nelson's death before us? Amanda asked Karen. He had to have seen that video. Either he has a mole in the bureau or he's illegally hacking security feeds. And what's more, you didn't do a thing about it. Don't you care about the law? Karen glanced her way and then yawned widely. Sure I do, but I'm not going to waste our time and the taxpayers' money trying to prosecute him. Fulbright's got to be worth like $50 billion. When you have that sort of money, laws become, let's say, pliable. And all those looks of righteous indignation aren't going to mean a damn thing. Her current look of righteous indignation turned fiery. Roan put out a hand. Okay, I've got a dead guy in there, some more dead guys in the ground, and some missing guys. What I don't have is a reason for my team to be here. You're here because you're a damned FBI agent. That's a crime scene, and I'm your superior. Carrion had turned to Roan, and the two were now almost nose to nose. Roan was younger, stronger, and faster. Only the law kept him from stomping the piss out of Karen. The law wasn't pliable for him, at least not with witnesses around. After a deep breath, Roan took a step back. What are your orders, Monfer? Karen laughed easily, as if the moment before hadn't happened. Number 1, stop being a dick. Number 2, there's a possible witness in that white van. Go talk to him. Find out what he knows. Once more, this was a job for pretty much any other team in the FBI. As far as Roan knew, there was only one reason that he, in particular, was being asked to talk to a witness. When you say talk, what exactly do you mean? It means I want you to talk to him. That's it. Just talk. Now, if you'll excuse me, I want to get a warrant to get us onto Arching's properties. Karen waved a dismissive hand, and abruptly, Roan turned for the white van, forcing his team to jog to keep up. Amanda did so wearing a scowl, which did a number on her soft Midwestern features. What did he mean by just talk? What else were you going to do? As far as I know, nothing, Roan answered. I don't know who this guy is. He could be just some schmuck. Schmuck. I don't know why I said schmuck. It's schmuck. Anyway. Tell me, would it be different if he was a criminal? She added an arched eyebrow to her scowl. The answer depended on what sort of a criminal he was. Roan was easily triggered when children's lives were involved. He gave her a half-shrug in answer. She stopped just feet from the van. Listen, sir, I can't be a part of illegalities. I joined the FBI in order. We're just going to talk, he said, interrupting. He tapped on the sliding door of the van. Hello in there. Are you decent? Roan didn't wait for an answer and slid back the door. Tim Cole, his hair still greasy, his teeth unbrushed, and wearing the same ill-fitting and rumpled suit he had worn the night before, sat on the back bench of the van. He was a big man who took up the entire bench, and then some. He looked at Roan blearily. You ain't my lawyer, and since you ain't my lawyer, you can shut that door and let me sleep. In my world, only a criminal asks for a lawyer right off the bat, Roan said. Are you a criminal? Cole didn't say a word. Roan turned to Amanda. You went to law school, right? Make a note every time he obstructs justice by refusing to answer. Okay, let's start. What's your name, sir? Cole's eyes slid over to Amanda, who had pulled out a small notebook and had a pen poised, ready to write down his first obstruction charge. He groaned. Timothy Cole, but call me Cole. Don't call me Timothy. Sure, Cole, Roan said agreeably. Why don't you tell me what got you stuck in this van? I'm guessing that since you were so quick to demand a lawyer, you weren't simply walking by and saw the fire. No, I wasn't. Another glance at Amanda. She only gave him a slight shrug. It seemed to confuse him. I was in my room in the basement. I worked for Mr. Nelson. I did, like, odd jobs for him. Like private investigator work, you could say. One of the French benefits was that I got to live here rent-free. Jared snorted in mocking laughter. Roan guessed that he found French benefits funny. Roan turned his hard blue eyes on him and glared the laughter out of him before he addressed Cole again. See? That wasn't so hard, was it? You don't need a lawyer for this sort of thing. We would have found all this out simply by taking your fingerprints. Licensed PIs have to be fingerprinted. You are a licensed investigator, right? I don't need a license. I worked for him on the other side. I don't get it, Roan said. The other side of what? In Jersey? Jared laughed. Jersey, that's a good one. No, he's talking about in Daggerland. You act like you've never been there. Roan hadn't been. So far, his life had been exciting enough that he didn't need to escape into a fantasy world to get his kicks. It was obvious on his face, and Jared grinned. We've got a virtual virgin in our midst. Shut up. Roan growled at him and then faced Cole. Explain how this worked. You live in Nelson's R&D building, and you get paid for PI work done in a game? Cole bristled at the description. It's more than the game. It's life, but better than life. And yes, I make a living working in Daggerland for Mr. Nelson. I'd keep an eye on his rivals, I would watch over his castle, I'd kill his enemies. Virtually killed them, that is. Roan was having trouble wrapping his mind around the concept. And you got paid in real money. Real American currency? An ugly grin crossed Cole's face. Yeah, probably a lot more than you. I raked in 6 figures last year. What did you make? A whole lot less than $100,000, Roan thought. This isn't about me. This is about you and Mr. Nelson. So you get paid to help him in Daggerland. Did anything happen there last night? Yeah, there was a break-in. He's got this castle. Over there he was, Gethahim, master of the Red Wizards. He lives in a place called Mendenome, and it has all these guards, but they're only NPCs. It means they ain't real. They're part of the program, but they fight for him. Either way, this group of adventurers comes up and tears into the guards. I clocked out and told Mr. Nelson. That was the last time I saw him. Not even in the virtual world? Amanda asked. Cole gave her a long up and down look. Nah, I made a sandwich. The next thing I knew, the building was on fire. That's all I know. So can I go? Roan didn't like his answers. They were too odd. This is definitely a completely unique concept for LitRPG that I've seen. It's very interesting. Alright. The next day, they were in Fulbright's limousine again, only this time it was whispering southwest. To Jared's endless amusement, they were heading to New Jersey. The headquarters of Infinite Reality was situated on 20 acres and what appeared to be a 15-story cube of pure black glass. Although it was midday on a Wednesday, the parking lot was completely empty. It's been like this for the last 3 weeks, Fulbright said. The lot has been thinning out for a year now. Arching has been laying off his staff by the dozen, but who's taking their place, no one knows. He shipped the jobs overseas? Karen asked. Fulbright shrugged and began to once more tap his cane. He'd been doing it for the entire ride. It was driving Roan nuts. I'm missing your connection to all of this, Mr. Fulbright. Were you a partner of Nelson's? An investor, or what? I am part of a consortium that owns the majority share of Infinite Reality, and I am a minority owner of GN Industries. I stand to lose billions, so you might say that I have a vested interest in the virtual world. You also stand to gain billions, Amanda said. Isn't that true? Fulbright chuckled and thumped his cane harder, his way of clapping. Yes, my dear, I do, but only if the balance is maintained and Arching is not one for balance. He's been the driving force behind the virtual world for over 20 years, and no matter what the other developers say, Daggerland is his baby. I get the feeling that he's like an actual mother in that regard. He'll do anything to protect it. And that includes killing off his competition, Karen said, speaking as if it were a fact and not a hypothesis. Fulbright answered by nodding and thumping his cane quietly. Then Karen asked a question that was on Roan's mind. Are you afraid that he'll come after you? On this side? No. He thinks of me as just one of the money guys. To him we simply supply an item he needs. Possibly, in his mind, we are no more important than the people who supply the keys to his keyboards, or the tiny screws that hold the sidewall of his computers on. No, he won't kill me, but I believe he doesn't need me any longer. We'll see when we open those doors. The 6 of them exited the limo and went to the black glass doors. Charon thumped on the doors with his fist. When no one answered, he gave the handles a pull. They didn't budge. With a grunt, he took out a collapsible steel baton, gave his wrist a flick in order to extend it, and then smashed in the glass. Although Charon made no attempt to stifle the sound, no one came to investigate the crash. The building was dark and silent. Mr. Arching! Charon yelled at the top of his lungs as he stepped across the threshold. Heavy silence greeted them. I guess we'll go floor by floor. Why bother? Roan asked. We won't find anything, will we? Fulbright shook his head, his jowls swinging. Roan felt the glare creep onto his face as he asked, So, what was the real point of coming here? My guess is that you are hoping that we come to a conclusion concerning Arching on our own. Well, let's cut out the baby steps. Just tell us. Hold on, Amanda interjected. As far as we know, Atticus Arching hasn't committed a single unlawful act. We don't have a shred of evidence that points to him. All we have is Mr. Fulbright's word. That's not all we have, Karen said. We have 3 dead developers, each of whom died under suspicious circumstances, and each linking to Mr. Arching. I didn't want to believe it before, but every time I watch that video of Nelson lighting himself up, I can only come to the conclusion that it's not him. You know how he appeared to be drunk. Tox came back on his blood. It was completely clean. Fulbright thumped his cane on the sidewalk inside. Of course it was clean. Nelson acted the way he did because the person who was walking in his body had never been in it before. I suspect it takes some getting used to. That's only more conjecture, Amanda said. You have no proof. If we intend to go forward with the case against Mr. Arching, we're going to need real, tangible proof. That's too bad, Fulbright said, because the only proof you're going to find is virtual. The proof you need for a conviction can only be found in Daggerland. I've noticed that these have, like, kind of a weird smell. This last one had the same smell. I don't even know how to describe it, but it's very a distinctly this brand smell. It's almost like a savory type smell, which is weird because these are fruity cocktails. Anyway, Chapter 3, New Rochelle, New York. Amanda planted her hands on her hips and looked at Fulbright as though he were crazy. You can't be serious. Virtual evidence can never be corroborated. Nothing we get in Daggerland will ever stand up in court. Don't listen to her, Jared said, pushing Amanda behind him. Count me in. He stood in front of Fulbright, softly clapping his hands together like a child who'd been told he was going to see Santa. Marshall came to stand shoulder to shoulder with his friend. Yeah, me too, I'm in. We'll probably need stipends to outfit our party properly. I have an idea for matching cloaks. They're dark blue with... Enough, Roan said, quietly, but forcefully. We're not going anywhere. We don't solve crimes by prancing around in a make-believe world. Perhaps, maybe, once we've exhausted all the leads here, we can see what there is in Daggerland. Until then, we have to check out Cole's alibi. There's also Nelson's secretary to interview, and there was the cleaning lady. What? Karen was shaking his head. I have agents working on those leads already. What I don't have is someone in Daggerland asking questions. Rowan couldn't believe what he was hearing. Karen had been supervising agent when he was fresh out of Quantico. Karen knew that Rowan wasn't just another badge putting in the hours. Rowan lived for the hunt. He balled his fist and was about to get in Karen's face when Fulbright poked him with that annoying cane. I don't see what the issue is, the old man said. If anyone will break the case, it's going to be you four. You'll fit right in. He turned his cane and pointed it at each of them in turn. Nerd, nerd, girl nerd, and enforcer. You'll blend. Neither Jared nor Marshall seemed to care that they'd been called nerds, but Amanda glared, although not as hard as Rowan. So we've been auditioning? He demanded. You should be happy that you passed, Karen said, with the cold as ice look which told Rowan he wasn't going to listen to another word on the subject. Karen turned on his heel and walked out of the building, heading for the limo, saying over his shoulder, You'll go under back at the field office. I've got some cots set up in the basement. Fulbright seemed appalled at the idea. A basement? With spiders and old boxes and whatnot? Please, I have plenty of space in my home where the agents will be perfectly comfortable. They'll each have their own room, and I have a pool for when they come back from Daggerland. It's very relaxing. Jared and Marshall shared a look of excitement, but Karen dashed their hopes. No. You're very generous, Mr. Fulbright, but that would be too much. It'll spoil them, and we wouldn't want that. Besides, we're going to monitor their bodies while they're gone, just in case. The words just in case put a damper on things, especially with Jared and Marshall, who sobered up quickly, remembering this wasn't just an online romp. There could very well be danger. Amanda seemed especially nervous as she found a spot in the limousine. We're going to be monitored? She asked, her tongue flicking out to wet her lips. Will you be able to see what we do online? I've never done this before. It sounded like fun, but it's always so expensive, and I heard it could become addictive. You know, like gambling. And how people can get hacked. I don't know about this. Fulbright waited until the limo was whisking along again before he thumped his cane. My dear, do not be afraid. The security for the system is top-notch. In fact, it's so good that what happened to poor Mr. Nelson is utterly inexplicable. The designers, all 6 of them, foresaw this sort of mind control as a possibility and built protections into the system, starting with a neural coupler. How can I put this? You've been to a concert before, yes? Yes, of course, but this is... He held up a finger. Picture a concert with general seating. Now picture the concert in a football stadium with 10 million people in attendance. It's like that. The game knows you've walked through the door, but after that it has no idea where you are because what is happening is only happening in your mind. To continue the analogy, the game doesn't know where you parked either. In other words, there's no way for the game to know where you logged in from. What about your neural print? Jaren asked. Shouldn't that be unhackable? Instead of an immediate, of course, Fulbright shrugged. That's sort of a gray area. Your neural print is very much like your fingerprint. It's perfectly singular, and again, just like a fingerprint or your DNA, it's not exactly secret. Everywhere you go, you leave fingerprints and bits of DNA, and as you sit there, Mr. Maddox, your neural print is radiating from your mind. Subconsciously, Amanda touched her blonde hair. And it can be picked up? Sure. It's simple. You've seen an holy shit. Sorry. This is a word for me. Electroencephalogram. I think I said that right. Where people have electrodes hooked up to their skulls. With a very subtle machine, a person can be read without all the electrodes. But even if they could take your neural... I'm sorry, I'm still laughing at that word. Anyway, but even if they could take your neural print, the most they can do is take over your character, Jared said. That's how the game knows who is who. The neural couplers are receivers only. They can't send out brainwaves, and even if they could, it would probably just give someone a conniption fit. Exactly, Fulbright said with a final thump of his cane. The game is perfectly safe. Except it isn't, Rowan said softly. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in this limo and Greg Nelson would still be alive. Wow, I gotta read that word again. Electroencephalogram. Alright. The basement of the Manhattan FBI field office was as dark and spider-filled as Fulbright had supposed. 4 moldy-smelling cots had been arranged and set side by side with only a few feet in between. The pillows were new, Rowan noted, and the neural couplers were still in their original packaging. This is going to be awesome, Jared said, kicking off his dingy sneakers and sitting on the first cot. Look out, world! Mad Max, King of the Mountain King, city of Agmere is back. No, he's not, Karen said. You'll go in as a new character. Call it precaution, but I don't want you to go in as someone you've played before. The one developer who's still alive says she has been playing a series of first-level characters. The whole thing felt like nonsense to Rowan, especially the ridiculous names. And don't for a second think I'll be calling any one of you King this or Queen that. Your name will be Jared, and your name will be Marshall. You can pick a goofy last name if you wish. Sure, that's cool, Jared said. I have to warn you that once we're in the game, it'll take off points if you break character. Rowan had been untying the laces on one of his shoes, but he paused just long enough to glare at Jared. We're not going there for points, whatever those are, Rowan said. Our job is to find Arching and see what he knows about what's going on. It's as straightforward as that. Marshall was already on the far bunk, spilling into the area between his and Amanda's cot. It might be a little more in-depth than that. We're going to need a rogue. Not it. Not? Began Jared, but then he saw Amanda's confused look and Rowan's glare, which had intensified. Oh, fine, I'll be the rogue. Marshall will be the cleric, Amanda will be the wizard, and Supervisory Special Agent Rowan will be the fighter. Hopefully you'll let me call you Rowan when we're in Daggerland. Rowan was slow to answer. He was still trying to He was still trying to wrap his head around all of this. Cleric, wizards, and what the hell is a rogue? Yeah, call me Rowan. We'll keep this simple. If you want simple, then you should play as yourself, Marshall said, propping himself up on one elbow. You too, Amanda. You get a choice to either play as yourself, a random generation, or as a build. I always do a build because all of your attributes start at 12, and then you have 9 points to divide among them. You can't make any one attribute higher than a 16. Still, it's pretty good. I don't play as myself because although I'm pretty smart, I have only an 8 dexterity and a 9 in both constitution and charisma. That's pretty sucky. I should go as myself? Really? Amanda asked. I'm not very strong. Jared gave her an extra close look. You work out, right? And you're smart and pretty. I'd say you have at least a 16 intelligence and a 15 charisma. Maybe a 15 dexterity. It's hard to judge wisdom, but you're at least average and probably higher. Yeah, I'd go as yourself. You'll make a good level 1 wizard. Anything else? Rowan asked. Yeah, there's a million things, Jared said, stretching his arms out. At first, it'll be sort of like going to a foreign country as a toddler, but you'll catch on. Just follow the prompts. We'll meet in the middle of town. Just use the party name of, how about Mystic Gorilla? Mystic Gorilla? Rowan asked. It's going to be like this the entire time, isn't it? Jared grinned. Yeah, cool, huh? Oh, this is a great book. I'm really super enjoying this. It's fun. It's fun and smart and a lot of good things. Alright. Rowan settled onto his cot, placed the coupler across his forehead, and closed his eyes. Completely on their own, they popped open, but it wasn't the ceiling of the basement that he saw. He found himself in a dark alley, but it was no alley that he had ever seen before in his life. It was paved in damp cobblestones, moss growing between the stones. The way was narrow, with odd buildings looming on either side. The structures were absolutely haphazard. No two were alike in height or construction. Some were made of what looked like homemade kiln-fired bricks, and others were of wood planks that had knots poked out, or were warped, letting light and noise filter out. Some had iron bars across their windows, while others had wood shutters that were flung wide. A few had gutters and downspouts, and most had wood-shingled roofs. The alley was empty except for an oily-looking rat that sat, hunkered down next to one of the buildings. It had its beady eyes turned to Rowan, as if it had been surprised by a sudden appearance and didn't know which way to run. Rowan turned away from it, ignoring it. He wasn't there for a rat. At least, not that sort of rat. With a quick and very surprising move, he leapt up onto the wall to his left where the bricks were uneven, set by an amateur. To his amazement, he climbed right up the wall as if it were a ladder, aiming for a window that was partially closed. "Is this part of the game?" he asked. His voice was only an echo in his head. In the game, he was soundless as he peered into the window. The room beyond the rickety shutters was dark, filled with shadows. However, he could just make out a bed, and upon it was what seemed to be a man. Rowan's head nodded, and a real word slid from between his clenched teeth. Yes. His right hand let go of the sill and reached into a pouch that dangled from his belt. From it he produced a stoppered vial. Rowan thought it was a potion of some sort. However, he didn't drink it. Instead, he lifted it to the hinges of the shutters and dribbled some on them. It was oil. Now the shutters opened soundlessly. Like a giant spider, he crawled into the room, making barely a whisper of sound. When he pulled his dagger, it came out of its sheath with a tiny scrape, and when he plunged it into its sleeping victim, Rowan jumped in shock as the image froze, and a woman's voice, soft and silky, spoke. "Welcome to infinite reality." The image broke into thousands of points of light that evaporated, leaving behind only darkness. Rowan was no longer in his body, or in the body of the robe. The idea behind the word had suddenly popped into his head. Rowan was part of the darkness, which didn't last for more than a second, and then there was a glowing grid in front of him. "What is your desire?" the woman asked. Daggerland was the first game on the grid. Dagger? Even before he had finished the word, the grid vanished and was replaced by an image of a red dragon that towered over his head. From its gaping jaws, fire poured out, looking as though it were about to incinerate a knight in armor and a buxom woman in what appeared to be some sort of bikini. Why would she be wearing a bikini? Rowan thought. It didn't make any sense. Next to the woman's bikinied right breast were the words, "New Game," and beneath that, in darker print, was, "Resume Game. New Game." The image of the dragon disappeared and was replaced by what felt like a movie. A scroll unraveled before him, and upon it was a map with the word Daggerland etched in looping letters across the top. Many thousands of years ago, when the world was young and mankind was still filled with hope and vigor, there was a land where magic ruled and creatures of every sort made their home. It was an old man's voice. He spoke as if telling a story. A long story. "Can I skip this?" Rowan asked. He didn't need or want to hear about the made-up history of a made-up world. The voice cut away, as did the image. Replaced it was a picture of himself, standing in the darkness, completely naked. Next to his body were three choices. "Play as yourself, random generation, build." "I'll play as myself," he said, thinking that this would be the quickest way to get into the game. "Please pick up the barrel and lift it over your head," the woman said. In front of him was a simple metal barbell. "Please pick up the barbell and lift it over your head," the woman said. In front of him was a simple metal bar with what looked like a 25-pound weight on either side. 50 pounds was nothing to him. He reached down and jerked the bar to his chin, but as he pressed the weight over his head, the weights on either end began to grow bigger and heavier with every inch he lifted the bar until he was straining with every muscle in his body. At a certain point, he just couldn't lift the bar any further, and the weight disappeared. Strength 16, modifier +3. Now a series of boxes filled his vision. At first he thought it was a game of tic-tac-toe. However, the first block on the upper left contained a square, the middle block had a circle, and the last had a square within a circle. On the next row appeared a triangle, then a circle, and then a triangle within the circle. Before the last row could be filled in, Rowan asked, "What is this?" "Your intelligence is being rated," the woman said. "Intelligence is an important trait for wizards. It is also used to—" "Can we skip all of this?" The tic-tac-toe box disappeared, and he found himself back at the screen with his body and the other choices. "Play as yourself, random generation, build." "Random generation, please," he said, hoping to speed up the process. There was a blur, and then he saw that he had changed, and not for the better. He seemed skinnier, and instead of the sharp look in his blue eyes, he thought that they were somewhat dull, perhaps even dim. And although he still recognized himself, his dark hair was clingy and greasy, and his teeth were crooked, and his forehead seemed larger than usual. Next to his body was another grid which read, "Character name, Rowan. Strength 12 + 1, Dexterity 12 + 1, Constitution 14 + 2. Intelligence 8 - 1, Wisdom 14 + 2, Charisma 10 + 0. Now he understood. His strength had dropped 4 points, which accounted for his small size, and he supposed that his natural charisma was significantly higher than a 10. He curled his lip at the image and the stats, but hit the accept button nonetheless. After this, he was inundated with more choices, and he buzzed as quickly as he could through them. He was asked his character's name, and that was simple enough, Rowan. Next came his sex, which was another easy one, male. Then came a question of class. Now things grew muddled. Fighter was what Jared, Marshall, and Fulbright had suggested, and yet it seemed so limited. As far as he could tell, as a fighter, he would only be able to kill, crush, maim. Why do I even care? He asked. He wasn't there to play. He was there to learn about a possible suspect. With this in his mind, he chose the first fighting style that was offered, archery. He was about to click through the race options just as quickly. He was human, after all, but paused when he saw the elf choice. It called him, but only for a second. Quickly he chose human. Next came alignment, which was basically a person's moral position. That was easy. He was an FBI agent and lawful good was a natural fit. Next came character traits. Skip, he said. Did he wish to change his appearance? No. Did he wish to add background information? No. Did he wish to add credit card information to purchase extra starting gold? Hell no. Are you playing with a party? Yeah, it's called Mystic Gorilla. That sounded stupid just saying it. The final question concerned the difficulty level of the game. Whatever's easiest. Do you accept the character Roan? The woman asked. There was a surreal wedding feel to his answer. I do. It was almost as if he was marrying his real life to this fake one. The second he accepted his character, a door appeared in front of him. It was made of rusted iron and looked as though it belonged in a dungeon. The old hinges screamed at him as he opened the door and walked through into a different world. His first reaction was one of shock. He had assumed that the game would be lifelike, or close to real, but maybe just a little off, so that he'd be able to pick out the fake clouds or see that the grass was just a little too green. But the game was as real as reality. It was so unexpectedly real that for a moment he felt dizzy. When he reached back for the door, he found that it was gone. This is crazy, he whispered, tasting the clean air as it passed over his tongue. Bending down, he touched the hard, packed earth at his feet. It was gritty and rough. He picked up a handful and stared hard at the individual pebbles and the tiny pieces of earth. It was all perfect, right down to the smallest detail, and he was sure that if you put the dirt under a microscope, it would be indistinguishable from any other dirt. Standing, he looked past the minutiae and saw that there were some differences in this world. He was on the edge of what appeared to be a medieval town square. It was a perfect example of a town right out of merry old England, except there were dwarves in the square. Not dwarves that would be found on Earth, but dwarves out of Middle-earth. They were Tolkien-esque. Three walked right past him, chatting in deep voices. They were short, not quite 4 feet in height, but they were incredibly thick through the shoulders, arms, and thighs. They wore armor made of metal rings sewn over hard leather. The two carried battle axes that had short handles but very wide blades, while the third carried a warhammer with a steel head. It was nicked, pitted, and bloody. Roan didn't realize he was staring until one of the dwarves stopped and stared right back. Jared? Roan asked. The dwarf answered. You got the wrong dwarf, noob, and if you keep staring like that, someone's gonna knock your teeth in for you. Sorry, it's my first time. I've never been in a reality game before. It's a little disconcerting, and, he was distracted as a light tone sounded in his head and words appeared in his vision just to the right of the dwarf. XP 0. What the hell is that? The dwarfs pushed on by, one muttering, Next time read the manual, moron. Roan wasn't used to people or dwarves calling him names, but just as he was about to respond, an elf walked by, and once more he found himself staring. It's so real, he whispered. As a female elf, just an inch or so over 5 foot, and slender as a willow, she wore soft leather armor that had been dyed green and had been cut and stitched in such a way so as to exactly resemble leaves. Her face was thin and sharp with angular cheekbones and dramatically pointed ears. They had to be 4 inches high. The elf gave him a glance and he quickly turned away, not wanting to be offensive. When he did, he saw 2 people who didn't seem to belong in the crowd. They were humans and were just oddly compared to everyone else. They both wore plain brown pants and white shirts, spun from the same coarse material. Only when Roan noticed their outfits did he realize that he was wearing the same exact thing. Noob clothes, he muttered, guessing that this was the standard starting gear. He walked to the pair. It was Jared and Marshall, both looking strangely average in appearance, which was, to be honest, a boost. Jared was slightly taller and slightly thicker. He was no longer as pale, and the pouches were gone from beneath his eyes. Marshall was slimmer and much more muscular. His brown hair was thicker and hung to his shoulders. Marshall was the first to notice Roan. What did you do? You're supposed to play as yourself. That took too long, so I chose, for some reason he couldn't remember what he had chosen when he had started the game. There had been, what, build yourself? That didn't seem right. It was build something and maybe being somewhere. Frustrated, he snapped. It doesn't matter. We have a job to do. Where's Miranda? Do you mean Amanda? Jared asked. My God, what's your intelligence, like a 5 or something? It's an 8 and it'll be good enough. Marshall sighed. No, it won't, but I get the feeling you're going to have to learn your lesson the hard way. He gave his friend a significant look, an obvious one that Rowan should have been able to deduce a meaning from, but it was lost on him. Marshall went on, Jared, wait here for Amanda. I'm going to get us outfitted, and we'll see what happens from there. Hey, Rowan, Marshall said, speaking loudly and slowly. Did Karen give you any extra gold? Rowan couldn't remember. The conversation he'd had with Karen was slipping away like smoke that he couldn't grab. As he was standing there, Marshall reached out and shook a pouch that Rowan only just noticed. The pouch was tied to a short length of twine that was acting as a belt. The pouch clinked softly and seemed as deflated as a balloon. Damn it, Marshall swore. We only have the minimum. 10 gold apiece. It's not much, but it'll get us armor and a weapon. That sounded promising enough since everyone else was walking around in plate or chainmail or leather. Around the town square were a number of vendors selling all sorts of items, from candles to what was supposedly dragon ears. Marshall clucked at them as they walked by. Fakes. You can tell by the scales. Here we go, armor. Rowan didn't know which to stare at first, the suits of finely wrought armor or the little creature who was selling them. He knew what dwarves and elves were, but this thing was neither. It was as small as a dwarf, but much slimmer. It had long fingers and sharp eyes. It caught Rowan staring and raised an eyebrow at him. Yes, the creature said in a creaky voice. Rowan's wisdom was high enough not to ask the obvious question. What the hell are you? Instead, he pulled out his gold and asked, What can I get for this? It seemed like a lot of money, and he was sure he could score at least some chainmail, but the creature only pointed at a suit of dull brown leather armor and an odd set of clothes that looked like it was made out of quilted cloth over pillow foam. Football players had better armor. He started to shake his head, however Marshall pointed at the padded armor. We'll take that. 5 gold, right? Rowan started to protest, and Marshall gripped his arm and hissed, It's all we can afford for now. It's why we need more gold from Karen. Rowan felt it was best to rely on Marshall, who seemed to know what was going on. The armor was paid for, and Marshall said, Think the armor onto you. When you're not in combat, you can think armor on and off. It saves time in the game. It was simple, and, in a snap, the padded armor was nestled all around him. He made a face. It was light enough, however it was oddly thick, and he felt puffed up. They moved on to weapons. With the last of his gold, Marshall bought him a war pick. Not a sword or a battle axe or bow, but a war pick, which was exactly like a mining tool. It had a blunt end for hammering and a pointy end for stabbing, Rowan supposed. It's really not that bad, Marshall said. Then why aren't you getting one? Rowan had just noted that Marshall had neither armor nor weapon. Marshall clapped him on his padded shoulder. Because I am saving my money to buy you a drink. You know, while we wait for Amanda. He led them away from the vendors and to a tavern. Rowan had been in his fair share of seedy, puke-smelling dumps in his time, but this beat them all. There were all manner of people and creatures inside, though the place was so dark and smoke-filled that it was hard to get a good look at any of them. Archie could have been in one of the many little alcoves, and Rowan wouldn't have had a clue. The clientele was diverse, and so were the employees. There were 3 bartenders, and only one was human. What is this? Rowan asked, under his breath and jerking his head towards a hulking, pig-nosed, tusked, off-green bartender. It's a half-orc, Marshall told him. They're usually pleasant, but since he has the shortest line, let's get you a drink. Marshall shouldered his way over to the bar and ordered 2 house meads. They're usually unpleasant. Sorry about that. The half-orc grunted and grabbed 2 rusty iron chalices from a dripping pile. He wiped the chalices with a filthy towel and proceeded to pour in an amber liquid. Rowan watched in disgust as drool slid from one of his tusks and dropped into one of the cups, the same cup that he pushed towards Rowan. 4 coppers, the half-orc growled, wiping his chin with the back of his hand. There's drool in this, Rowan said, pushing it back. The cup is dirty. Try again. He didn't need to be a genius or even very smart to know that it wasn't good to drink drool, especially from this sort of creature. It was not something he would allow in the real world. And it wasn't something he would put up with here. Oh boy, Marshall said, taking his chalice and stepping back as the half-orc reached beneath the bar and picked up a scimitar. The sword was 3 feet of curved, razor-sharp metal. Using his filthy thumb, the half-orc tested the edge and said to Rowan, Now it's 8 coppers. Rowan shook his head, taking up his war pick. He had never used one, but it felt natural in his hands. No, 4 coppers and a fresh, clean glass. There's no reason to threaten. The half-orc leapt over the bar, and still Rowan did not really think the creature would attack him. Why would he? No one did that in the real world, not over a glass of weird-looking beer. He was still in denial when the bartender slashed in a downward stroke with a scimitar. Rowan was too slow in bringing up his war pick, and the scimitar tore through the padded armor and went deep into the sloping muscle between his neck and shoulder. There was a strange dull pain in his now severed trapezius muscle. He wasn't close to recovering from the shock of the attack when he noticed that in the upper right side of his vision were words etched in a red, damage -8. And beneath it was a bar graph that was more than half gone. Was this his life? Was he already half dead? Instead of using his war pick to attack, Rowan bellowed, "Hey, stop!" The half-orc did not stop. He drove his sword under Rowan's useless pick. The tip curved up through his diaphragm and into his heart. Rowan knew he was going to die a second before his heart was slit in half. When the realization of it struck him, there was nothing virtual in the horror that gripped him. He started to fall just as more of the bright red words flashed in his vision. Damage, critical hit, -14. Beneath it, the bar graph was completely empty. Chapter 4. Morn. Kingdom of Elspar. With a gasp, Rowan sat up on his cot, clutching his chest. He could still feel where the scimitar had slid deep into him. There was even a grinding echo where the blade had gouged into his spinal column after it had torn through his heart. "What the hell?" he asked in a whisper. "What kind of game is that? Who would actually pay money to play that?" Marshall sat up as well. He seemed completely fine. "It's actually a lot of fun if you play it right," which you didn't. Rowan thought the game had been interesting, and the graphics, if that's what they were even called, were without parallel. But fun? No, it was definitely not fun. Did you die too? No, I just clocked out. That half-orc hadn't done anything to... The door to the basement opened, and down came Karen, followed closely by Fulbright. Karen looked disgusting. "Damn it, Rowan, what did you do?" He shrugged, feeling disjointed and lost. His chest felt uncomfortable, the echo of his wound still there. Marshall answered for him. He did everything wrong. He didn't play as himself, he didn't go through the tutorial, he picked a fight right off the bat for no reason. Rowan looked at Marshall in amazement and then began to sputter in indignation. Karen didn't want to hear it. "Shut up, Rowan. What you just did cost the Bureau the taxpayers' money, and it cost me money as well." Rowan watched, puzzled, as Karen took out his wallet, counted out 5 20s, and gave them to Fulbright. "I didn't think you'd last 15 minutes, Fulbright explained. "For reasons that are inexplicable. Agent Karen had more faith in you, Mr. Rowan." A curse began to form behind Rowan's lips, and Marshall quickly said, "It's cool, no great loss. We're just going to call that a practice run. The game takes time to master, Rowan." "Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time," Fulbright said. "The intervals between each of the incidents have picked up, meaning that Arching is hitting his stride. It won't be long before he begins to wield his power here. If you and that last developer are that worried, just don't go into the game," Rowan suggested. "You'll be fine." Fulbright lifted his cane and pointed at Rowan, saying, "Your problem is that you still see infinite reality as a game. In Arching's mind, it's not. It is life, and it's just as real to him as this life is to you. And he is just as dangerous in this world as he is in the other. Think about it. Think about what sort of power he controls. He can take anyone and turn them into an assassin." "Anyone in the game?" Rowan said. "The answer's pretty simple. We can just shut it off. But you don't want to do that, do you, Fulbright? You're afraid of dying, but you're also afraid of losing your billions." "You want to turn it off?" Fulbright shot back. "Sure. Just tell me where the off switch is, and I'll do it. You saw IR headquarters. That's where the game used to be run from. IR hosts its own websites and has its own servers. Or I should say they had their own servers. Where Archer is running IR from is anyone's guess." Karen ran a hand through his thinning blonde hair. "So where does that leave us? Shutting down the internet?" Fulbright laughed in a short bark. 80% of all commerce is tied in some way to the internet. That's 80% of the world's commerce. No. Our choices are few. We either find Arching or we find where on this planet he set up his platform. The room was quiet as each thought over their predicament. Finally, Rowan said, "I'll look for him on the other side. If he's there, I'll find him." "Play as myself," Rowan told the game. He then whispered, "It's not a game, it's life." It was a concept that he had to instill within his own mind. "Please repeat your command," the female voice said. "Life is not one of your choices." "Play as myself," Rowan repeated. As before, he was put through a series of tests. He lifted the heavy bar to measure his strength, and went through a series of increasingly difficult puzzles so that his intelligence could be quantified. Wisdom was all about perception, intuition, and understanding. He was asked to find items and pictures before going through a series of questions where the answers were always ambiguous. "Karina Troost. Who is 3? accidentally drinks poison, and at the same time, Carrie Morgan, who is 12, is dangling from a rain gutter after trying to rescue a cat from a roof. Who would you attempt to save first? His dexterity tests were ball-oriented. A rubber ball was thrown to him, and he was asked to catch it. Then 2 balls were thrown, 2 seconds apart, then 3, and so on. After that, he was asked to dodge the balls, which came at him faster and faster. Finally, he was supposed to throw the balls at different targets. Next came a constitution challenge in which he ran sprint after sprint, before running through an obstacle course where the obstacles would sometimes suddenly come alive and smash into him. He was bruised and bloodied by the time the test was over. A second later, he was utterly whole again. Last came a charisma test, which was the hardest challenge for him since it felt the most like play acting. He found himself in different scenarios. A pretty girl across from you makes eye contact. Ask her to an upcoming dance. You have 5 coppers, but the turkey dinner costs 6. Talk the waiter into lowering the price. You're facing an ogre and your party is considering running away. When he had completed the last of his tasks, he was shown his stats. Character name, Roan. Strength, 16 plus 3, Dexterity, 15 plus 2, Constitution, 17 plus 3. Alright guys, this is the end of the sample. Again, this is Infinite Reality, Daggerland Online by Peter Meredith. I thought this was an incredibly good read. It's very interesting. It takes LitRPG in a unique direction that I have not seen it before. I like that Roan is appearing to be the main character, and I like that he's not very familiar with the whole gaming thing, so that makes it kind of interesting. Anyway, if you enjoyed this, there will be a link to it in the description, so you can check it out, buy it if you liked it. Anyway, I hope you guys have a good day, a good night, a good week, a good weekend, whatever time it is that you're watching this, and I will talk to you later.